welcome to Capitol Hill. Well, it's a Monday with no major running stories about the carbon tax and no major running stories about asylum seekers either. It might be enough to gladden the heart of a Labor MP, except the government's fighting on so many other fronts, there are plenty of problems to take their place. And today, the question of mandatory pre-commitment on poker machines and a sign of global economic woes. Joining me to discuss the day's events are Independent MP Andrew WIlkie and Liberal frontbencher Matthias Cormann. Welcome to you both.
Good to be here.
Good afternoon.
First, we'll go to the AFL boss, Andrew Demetrio, who doesn't like the proposal for mandatory pre-commitment for poker machines, but doesn't like the insinuation that the AFL is joining up with either the NRL or Clubs Australia to fight against the proposal.
I've never spoken to the NRL about this issue. I've spoken to the NRL about other issues. The AFL is not involved in any campaign. It hasn't got any ads ready to go. And it's just been appalling the way this has been covered, and every 10-minute grab that we've got some campaign going. We're about to launch some campaign with Clubs Australia. The fellow from Clubs Australia, I don't even know his name. But please stop talking on our behalf. Just shut up.
Andrew WIlkie, Mr Demetrio says he would like to talk to you on the AFL's behalf about the proposal for mandatory pre-commitment, which he says he doesn't like. He says there are other options which could be explored. Are you happy to talk to him on that basis?
Oh, absolutely. I was very concerned over the weekend when it was being reported and put out there by Clubs Australia that the AFL had in fact joined the campaign against mandatory pre-commitment and other reforms. I'm very pleased to hear that Andrew has come out today and clarified that. Disappointed that Clubs Australia have again misrepresented an element or a stakeholder in this. That's not good enough. Clubs Australia, they need to talk for themselves and not make up lines for other organisations. Look, I respect the AFL's concerns, and I look forward to sitting down with the AFL and having a good long yarn to them about it.
Matthias, one of the AFL's presidents, Eddie Maguire, the president of Collingwood, has called mandatory pre-commitment a footy tax. On your understanding of what a tax is this a tax?
Well, let me just say up front that we do not, of course, support mandatory pre-commitment. We think it's very expensive and that it wouldn't work. It'll certainly stop social gamblers in their tracks. It'll be a hit on the clubs, but it won't address problem gambling. So to the extent that it increases cost and it reduces revenue, I can certainly understand why Eddie Maguire has described it as a tax.
Andrew, you've staked your support for the government on getting this legislation through the Parliament. You've left open the option of backing Mr Abbott or backing a no-confidence motion against Labor if the legislation doesn't get through, because you say you want to be a man of your word. How does it help your principles to remove your support from a party that does back mandatory pre-commitment and perhaps give your support to a party that doesn't?
Lyndal, can I first of all just dwell on that point about a footy tax? That comment by Eddie Maguire is patently ridiculous. There's no way in the world these reforms could possibly be regarded as a tax, and that sort of a misleading and inflammatory statement from Eddie Maguire is not what we expect from a man who has such a leadership role in the community. It is not a tax. All it is requiring players of high-intensity poker machines to determine their limit before they start gambling so that the system can lock them out when they reach their limit. And importantly, the other part of this reform is that we have $1 maximum bet machines which will accommodate the 88% of Australians who currently gamble $1 or less. So 88% of Australians won't go anywhere near mandatory pre-commitment if they choose. Now, as far as my commitment or my agreement with the government, look, it's well remarked upon. Nothing has changed. Everyone knows I'm holding the government to this. But if at the end of the day, in the very unlikely event that these reforms are not realised, well, I'll be a man of my word.
And a man of your word, even though it would mean potentially backing a party that does not support your proposals on mandatory pre-commitment and doesn't support things you support, like a carbon price.
Look, if it came to that, then being a man of my word means yes. I would end up, possibly facilitating coming to power a party or parties that don't support these reforms. But by that stage, there was no chance of these reforms being realised anyway. But look, I don't even know why we're talking so much about, what if these reforms aren't realised? Because my experience over the last 12 months is that the government is doing everything in its power to realise these reforms, and I applaud the Prime Minister and I applaud Jenny Macklin. I feel more confident now than I have ever felt about these reforms being realised, and the fact that the poker machine industry is thrashing around, and the fact that Clubs Australia is prepared to say or do anything, including threatening to sue me personally, I take that as a good sign that they know that the writing's on the wall.
Matthias, what do you think of the prospects of this legislation getting through the lower house, and are you happy to accept Mr Wilkie's support if they don't?
Well, many inside the Labor Party share our assessment of mandatory pre-commitment, and I doubt that Julia Gillard will ever be able to deliver on her promise to Andrew on this. Clearly, she will continue to, dare I say it, try and string him along because she knows she needs to do so in order to stay in power. Ultimately, obviously, Andrew's decisions on who he supports or who he doesn't support are his. But from our point of view, we think that we've got a very bad government in Canberra, a government that is inherently unstable, that people across Australia deserve better government than what they're currently getting. And so from that point of view, the sooner we can bring about a change of government and deliver better government to people across Australia, the better.
Andrew, you still have regular talks with the opposition leader, Tony Abbott. Have you talked about what you might do if this legislation doesn't get through with him, and talked about any conditions you might put on your support for him?
No, look, Tony has raised the matter with me on a few occasions. We've obviously brushed up against it. You can't really avoid it. But it's not something that I'm bringing up with Tony or wanting to discuss with him in any detail, because I don't think it's going to happen. I have a very optimistic view of what's happening with these reforms. At every turn, Julie Gillard and Jenny Macklin have done the right thing. And I believe the numbers are there in the Parliament for all sorts of reasons, one of which is that these reforms are popular. There have been a succession of credible opinion polls over recent months, including one just in the last few weeks by Essential Research and one a few weeks before that by the Australian National University. They're all showing an overwhelming majority of Australians support not just poker machine reform, but specifically mandatory pre-commitment on high-intensity poker machines. This is a potentially a very popular reform compared with some of the other government initiatives that are on the table at the moment. This is a vote winner, and in fact, I would warn Tony Abbott again, and I've warned him personally. He needs to be very careful about opposing these reforms because he risks losing votes. The majority of Australians, shown in poll after poll, are in agreement with the need for poker machine reform.
Matthias, do you think the public supports your position or Mr Wilkie's?
Well, as I say, our position is there for all to see. We do not support mandatory pre-commitment on the basis that we think it will be very expensive and it won't work. We support strong action to better address problem gambling, whereas what is on the table, we believe, will certainly stop social gamblers in their tracks. It certainly will have a significant impact on clubs. But it won't actually address the real issue. And all of us agree, I believe, in the Parliament that we do need to pursue better initiatives, better targeted initiatives to address problem gambling.
Now, the legislation for mandatory pre-commitment won't go into the Parliament until next year, but Matthias, there are reports in one of the papers today saying that the opposition is preparing possibly for a December election, potentially under a Kevin Rudd-led Labor Party. Is that the case?
Well, I mean, our job is to hold this government to account and to offer a better alternative. So, part of our responsibility to the Australian people in the face of this bad and inherently unstable government is to be ready for an election at any time and to stand ready to provide better government at any time. So, yes, we do prepare for any contingency to make sure that we find ourselves in the best possible position to win the next election, because we think that is in the national interest. If
you are ready, then it possibly means that you have your major policies. You will have your major policies on things like tax reform, industrial relations, ready potentially by October?
Well, we will be releasing our policies in the lead up to the next election. And of course, what is important here is that in good time, before people make a judgment at the next election, people will know what we stand for. People will know what our commitments are. Unlike with Julia Gillard, of course, who promised people across Australia that there would be no carbon tax under the government she leads, only to find themselves in a situation now where Julia Gillard is pressing ahead with exactly that.
Andrew, if the coalition is readying itself for an election at any possible moment, if that means that its policies are ready, would you like to see them ahead of time, and would you like to see them costed?
Well, there's a number of issues in there, Lyndal. It makes perfect sense to me that the opposition would be preparing for every contingency, and you know, one possible scenario is a change of leadership between, you know, sometime between now and the next election. It seems very, very unlikely, but I think there's actually nothing remarkable in the fact that the opposition is preparing for every possible contingency. You know, that's what a competent opposition would do. But I've got to add, I think it is a remarkably unlikely turn of events. My assessment is that the government's interests are best served by having stable leadership, by introducing a raft of policies, many of which are actually very popular. You know, I've already talked about the popularity of poker machine reform. There's also the National Disability Insurance Scheme the government has flagged, aged care reform and other reforms. And I assume the government is smart enough to realise that so long as they can roll these reforms out, bed them down, let people live with them, including the compensation that comes with the carbon pricing regime, and shows stability of leadership, I think that gives the Labor government the best chance to do well at the next election due in late 2013. It's certainly in my political interest, self-interest, for the government to be stable and go full term. And, you know, I sense that's the view of my crossbench colleagues. So I think at the moment there's an element of media beat-up. The media would love there to be instability and a leadership change, but my reading of the tea leaves is that's not on the cards at the moment.
Matthias, if we could go finally to the global economic woes, your finance spokesman Andrew Robb said this morning that the government has left Australia more vulnerable if there is another global downturn, but doesn't the Reserve Bank have plenty of room to move if there is a downturn affecting Australia?
Well, what Andrew Robb has said is a statement of fact. This government inherited a situation in 2007 with zero government net debt and $22 billion surplus and money in the bank, in the future fund. So, I mean, the situation we now find ourselves in, as a matter of historical record, is that Wayne Swan has delivered 4 successive deficit budgets, $159 billion worth of accumulated deficits, that we are now heading for $110 billion worth of government net debt. And of course, we've got 2 massive new tax packages on the table now for debate in the Parliament. Each one of those taxes actually would leave the budget even worse off. So we've had a track record of wasteful spending. We've got a fiscal position that has rapidly deteriorated under this government, and so our budget is now in a less strong position than what it was in 2007.
And that's where we'll have to leave it. We've run out of time, but Matthias Cormann and Andrew Wilkie, thank you very much for your time today.
Good to be here.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining Capitol Hill. Please join us at the same time tomorrow.